Okay, everybody. So this is a chapter 9 video. If I hear lawn care going on outside, I might have to stop it. And sorry if you hear that. It's not right outside right now, but it might be coming back. So this is the topic outline template. If you haven't seen this, if you don't know what I'm talking about, respectfully, you need to look at chapter 5. You need to look at that video and look at the assigned reading because that's also in one of the handouts that was required to look at or to be looked at before today. So check that out. And this is the topic outline. If you don't know what this is, go back and do some reading to catch up. This is just a review. So we're going to be talking today about how to organize your speech. So why does it matter? Why do we even have to think about this? Well, because if we don't organize our speech, it's just a chaotic mess. Like any good story, which a speech is kind of like a story or a movie or any sort of presentation, we like to have a clear beginning, middle, and end because people will recognize that structure and will be familiar with it enough to follow it. And we want our listeners to have an easy time following what we are doing. So organizing the speech is another way to frame structuring the speech or the framework of the speech, however you want to look at it. We have to be deliberate and thoughtful and intentional about how we want this speech to be structured and organized so that our audience can follow it. Okay, so that's what chapter 9 is about. So, strategic organization just means that you organize this speech thoughtfully, like I just said, to achieve a particular result with a particular audience. What do you know these people, what do you want these people listening to you in this specific audience to know, believe, or do when you're done? And how are you going to get there? So, in acting classes, you might hear people talk about the objective, the obstacles, and the tactics of a character. So, what that means is what does the character want? What is in their way? What's the obstacle? So, what is their objective and what's the obstacle? Why can't they just get it? And then, what are the tactics? Meaning, what are the methods or the behaviors to get around or over or through that obstacle to gain the objective to reach the goal? So, in a public speaking context, the objective might be to get my audience to understand why this topic, my favorite song, my precious object for speech number 1 is significant to me, to them, and to society. That's my objective. Well, what's my obstacle? Well, they don't know about it before now. And it's my job to teach them. And maybe they are not going to want to listen. Maybe their attention span's not great. Maybe they are just not clear on why they should care about this. All of the obstacles that are inherent in trying to get somebody to understand you and want to listen to you. And then what are my tactics? Those have to do with the methods. Those have to do with the structure. How am I going to get them to understand and to listen to me? So that's sort of the active part of the thoughtful structure, if you think about it that way. So, what are my main points? Well, my main points are the major ideas developed in the body of the speech, and most speeches are going to have 2 to 5 main points in this class. So, this concept is defined on your exam, so you'll need to know. And I don't love it when the definition includes terms in the term from the term it's defining because that's not as clear. So instead of major points developed in a body of speech, think of it as major ideas, right? Because if you don't know what a point is, and that's why you're looking up, like it says main points and then it says major points, that you might still be confused. So main points are the major ideas developed in the body of the speech. And again, most speeches are going to have 2 to 5. You don't need to worry about that. So here is a method of organization, and here's the kicker. Most speeches can be organized in any way that we're going to cover, but we are going to be thoughtful and deliberate about which is going to be the best and most effective way to organize them for our goals, our obstacles, and our tactics, our methods. So think about it like I've got a gift I want to give somebody. What is going to be the best box to present it to them in? If it's a round gift, I might put it in a square box or a round box. If it's a square gift, I might not be able to fit it in the round box, right? So, do I want a big box, a little box? Think about it that way. What kind of wrapping paper do I want? So, you're being deliberate about the packaging of the message. Okay. So in this instance, a chronological order, which is the first organizational pattern that we're going to cover. And there is a question about these organizational patterns on your exam, which again is multiple choice or true or false, and is open note, open book, open all the things. So chronological order means that my main points are going to follow a time pattern. So that might look like this. The building of the Great Wall began during the, I forgot how to pronounce a Q in Chinese, Shin dynasty, maybe Chin. I don't remember, but it's not a Q like in English. So, building of the Great Wall began during this dynasty of 221 to 206 BC. I need to look that up again. I used to know and then I forgot. And here I am. But this just goes to show you everybody can make mistakes. Everybody can be a little bit uh, under confident. And that doesn't mean that you have to let it throw you, because I'm not going to stop the video and start over because I messed that up. Just like you can have a minor mistake in your speech and still keep going. You don't have to drive yourself nuts trying to get it perfect. We all make mistakes. So I know next time before I teach this lesson, I need to look up that pronunciation. So new sections of the Great Wall were added during the Han Dynasty of 206 BC to 220 AD. And the third main point is the Great Wall was completed during the Ming Dynasty of 1368 to 1644. So that goes through the time. But if I were to say something like this part of the Great Wall was built, or this section of the Great Wall was built first, right? And I'm going like, or built with this material or this method, and I'm going from the middle of the wall because it's built in with a different method. This isn't really necessarily true, but I'm just giving it for instance. So if I were to say the middle section of the wall was built using this method, and the left section was built using this method, and then the section over on the other side was built during this using this method. I am covering the same material, but I am not covering it in the same way with the same emphasis. I don't have any sort of chronology or timeline in mind. So that wouldn't be as effective as this, which is delivered chronologically. So that's a rough example of why it might be a better choice to pick chronological order. And then you can talk about the methods that each one of these dynasties used. And so that information is still being relayed, but it is with that time pattern and it's easier to process. So if I wanted to talk about my main points in a directional pattern, then that is going to be spatial order. So things like geography, things like anatomy can be better achieved with a spatial organizational pattern. And this is what that might look like. So at the center of a hurricane is the calm, cloud-free eye. So we're almost talking about the anatomy of the hurricane. Surrounding the eye is the eye wall, a dense ring of clouds that produces the most intense wind and rainfall. And then rotating around the eye wall are large bands of clouds and precipitation called spiral rain bands. Now, that is, I'm going from the center and moving outward. So that's why I'm delivering this information in spatial order. That's how I know. But what if I were to say the first condition to cause a hurricane is this? And then after that happens, the next thing that happens is a weather condition like this. And then the third thing that happens to form a hurricane is this. I am going to be talking and giving probably the same information, but in that instance, I'm going to be delivering it in chronological order. First, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So I can give a speech about a hurricane using chronological order or spatial order, depending on what emphasis feels the most effective to me in terms of what my goal is to impress upon my audience, what material and what focus, what emphasis I want to have when I am trying to get them to connect to the topic and the main points. Okay, so causal order, which is causal, not casual, it's a different word. So causal order shows, as you might expect, the cause and effect relationship. So this causes this. This brought about this next condition. So same thing with the hurricane example. If I were to say first things happen, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and that forms a hurricane. If I'm focusing on chronological order, that makes it chronological. If I'm focusing on the order in terms of the timeline, but I might still be giving those things in that same order. But if my emphasis is on the cause, then it becomes cause and effect. So there might be some overlap. It depends on your emphasis. Where are you shining that light? So if I were to say, first thing, this happens when the hurricane is forming, but then it causes this next condition, which then causes this next thing, which then causes the hurricane to ultimately form. That's causal order. It might still be following the timeline, but that's not the focus. So then it becomes causal order. So again, we have the same topic, a hurricane, right? We've done it three different ways: causal order, chronological order, and then spatial order. So, again, depending on how you want to package your message, you might be able to pick any of the organizational patterns that we're listing. So, the US aviation system faces a growing shortage of qualified air traffic controllers. If this shortage continues, it will create serious problems for airline safety. So, this is causal order that would be in future tense. This is happening and it will cause this to happen. Causal order is interesting and can be effective because it can be past, present, or future. So sometimes we might be arguing this happened, which caused this to happen. Or we might be arguing this is happening, which is causing this to happen, or this happened, which is the cause of what's happening now, or this is happening, which might cause this to happen in the future. We hear this a lot when people are talking about climate change or global warming. This happened, which caused the current condition, or this is happening, which is going to cause this other thing to happen down the road, right? So it can be past, present, or future. For persuasive speech, and we'll talk more about this when we get into those persuasive chapters, which are 16 and 17 later in the term, but here's a preview. You would only use this one for a persuasive speech. The first main point is the problem, and the second main point is the solution. Problem, solution, order, you only have two main points. So puppy mills are a serious problem across the United States. Solving the problem requires legislation and individual initiative. Main point one is the problem, main point two is the solution. And again, as a reminder, I say this every time, I'm not playing the videos because when I share my screen, it usually doesn't work, but you have them available to watch in the PowerPoints that are loaded into Wolfden under coursework in the PowerPoint section. Topical order, pay attention to this one. This is going to be your bread and butter. This is one that works for persuasive or informative. And it's the one that our first speech, because I gave you the wording that is required for main points 1, 2, and 3, it's organized topically. I've already organized it for you in topical order because our brains tend to work that way in a list pattern. So think about topical order like a list of your main points. So I think that capital punishment should be abolished, or I think capital punishment should be legal in all 50 states. Either way, I come from that. If I give a list of all the reasons that I think what I think, that's topical order. It is a list of topics to support my main idea. My main points are going to divide the topic into logical, consistent subtopics, or a better way to think about that is I just make a list. Here are all the reasons that you should recycle. Here are all the reasons that my song is significant for speech number one, or here are all the reasons that my precious object is significant. Here are all the reasons that you should become an organ donor. Here are all the reasons that abortion should be legal, or here are all the reasons that abortion should be illegal, or here are all the reasons that abortion should be legal in these particular ways. Any way you slice a persuasive or an informative topic, if it is a list of reasons, it's topical order. And that is the one that I find is the least confusing. So make friends with topical order. Here's an example. As an entertainer, Josephine Baker captivated audiences in Europe and America. As a spy, Baker gathered information on Nazi activities in France during World War II. As a civil rights activist, Baker worked for racial equality on a variety of fronts. So remember that similar pattern of wording that's required? This is similar. It's more different than anything else we saw in chapter 5 in terms of I don't remember if I phrased that correctly. It's not as similar. It's not as identical as what we saw in chapter 5, but it is still very, very close and it is still a similar pattern of wording. It's just not as similar as some of the ones we saw in chapter 5. So, as an entertainer, as a spy, as a civil rights activist. But if main point 4 were Baker did this song that you might have heard, or performed in this film, or did this role, then that is off the beaten path. So this similar pattern of wording shows us that we've stayed on the right track, everything fits, and it gives us the different reasons that Josephine Baker is significant historically. So keep those main points separate so that they don't all blend together and they all get equal importance. And try for that same pattern of wording for the reasons that I just said. Balance time devoted to each. So if I spend a minute talking about main point one and 30 seconds talking about main point two, then main point two doesn't seem as important as main point one, and they should be equally significant. So supporting materials, again, we're using the word in the term to define it, which I don't love. Materials used to back up a speaker's ideas, to reinforce a speaker's ideas, to clarify a speaker's ideas. Those are supporting materials. So if you bring it up, you got to back it up. And how do you back it up with those supporting materials? Think about it like supporting beams under a floor are called the subfloor. They support the main floor. So your sub points are going to be supporting your main points, and we'll talk more about that. So the subpoints and the supporting materials amplify, illustrate, and clarify the main points. So we'll go back to that, if not in this chapter, in chapters that are upcoming. So we'll talk about that more. So what is a connective? Well, connective, again, is a word or phrase connecting or bridging ideas. So, what are the types of connectives? Don't get bogged down here. For our purposes, we're just going to say transitions because all transitions are connectives. Not all connectives are necessarily transitions, but for our purposes, let's just use them as synonyms. So, transitions, if you hear me say, hey, your transitions aren't clear, then that should be something that is very easy to apply for you to understand and apply those terms. So don't get bogged down in the different types of connectives. When I say transition, I'm bridging ideas, and that's good enough. So that'll make more sense to you as we go through this and when we get into our preparation outline, which is chapter 11. So, types of connectives, transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, signposts. Again, for our purposes, just think of these as different types of transitions. If you never remember the word connective, I'm okay with that, but I need you to remember transition. I need you to remember the word transition. And so think about these like different types of transitions. So what is the internal preview? What's the internal summary? And what's a signpost? We're going to talk about all of those one by one. So a transition indicates that a speaker has finished one thought and is moving to another. Think about it like a bridge. Now we've talked about main point one. Now I'm going to take you over to main point two because the speaker is ultimately responsible for being the tour guide for the listener. And because most people are not auditory listeners, they're more visual learners, which is to say they don't learn as well listening as they do hearing. Sorry, they don't learn as well listening as they do seeing. We're responsible for bringing them with us in ways that might not be as necessary in an essay. A speech is different from an essay in that way because if our speaker gets a little bit redundant or gets a little bit vague, it's harder for the audience to follow. They're not clear when they're moving from this part of the body to the next part of the body. Whereas if the writer in an essay is vague, then the reader can go back and look, or if the reader's mind wanders, they can go back and refresh where they are. They can take a second, and that's just not the case. It's a different medium for the speech. So in public speaking, transitions are exceedingly important because they're the bridges that you use to bring your audience with you to keep them from being confused and to keep their attention where you want it to be. So again, a transition indicates that the speaker has finished one thought and is moving to another. And for our purposes, we want transitions. We're going to talk about this more when we get to the preparation outline, but we want transitions to be between the introduction and the body, between the body and the main points, and inside the body between each of the main points. So most speeches are going to have from the intro to the body and the body to the conclusion, and then from main point one to main point two and main point two to main point three. Most speeches are going to have four, but you might have a more if you have more main points, but most speeches are going to have four transitions in them. So here's an example. I've spoken so far of Cesar Chavez, the community organizer, but it was his work as a labor leader that truly etched his name into American history. So I just got finished talking about his work as a community organizer. Now I'm going to talk about his work as a labor leader. I'm going from one idea to another idea, from one main point to another main point. An internal preview for our purposes, with our speeches being as short as they are, we're not going to use these. But there is a question on your exam that you're going to need to understand these terms for. And then also, when you're listening to a longer speech, you might see these, or if you're presenting one, you might need these. For our purposes, things that would be an internal preview might end up being an introduction, or things that would be an internal summary might end up being a conclusion. So, an internal preview is a statement in the body indicating what a speaker will discuss next. So our bodies are not going to be long enough for this to really make sense. But if I were to use this exact same wording in the beginning of my speech in my introduction, that might be effective. So an internal preview we know is internal preview because of the word internal, which means inside. So it's in the speech, it's in the body rather than being in the introduction, which would make it a preview, not an internal preview. So the word internal tells us it's inside the speech, it's in the body. So if I hear this in the body, I know it's an internal preview. In discussing how Asian Americans have been stereotyped in the mass media, we'll look first at the origins of the problem and second at its continuing impact today. But if my main points are about how the how Asian Americans have been depicted in mass media and how they've been stereotyped, we're looking first at the problem. My first main point would be the problem. And then my second main point would be its continuing impact today. So if I'm doing a speech in this class and I say this sentence, it's probably going to be in my introduction, which will make it a preview statement rather than an internal preview. But if it's inside the body of a longer speech, and it's an internal preview. So the difference has to do with where in the speech it is. Same thing with an internal summary. It's in the body and it summarizes where we've been. If we're going to say these kinds of things, it's probably going to be in the conclusion outside of the body, which will make it a summary or a conclusion rather than an internal summary. Because again, an internal summary is inside the body. So you're going to hear this in longer speeches. So, in short, palm reading is an ancient art. Developed in China more than 5,000 years ago, it was practiced in classical Greece and Rome, flourished during the Middle Ages, survived the Industrial Revolution, and remains popular today in many parts of the world. So this would be, for our purposes, in a 4 to 6 minute speech, this would be summarizing our main points probably. It would be a conclusion where we are recapping that our first main point was about how palm reading was developed in China more than 5,000 years ago. Our second main point was about how it was practiced in classical Greece and Rome. Our third main point was about how it flourished during the Middle Ages. And then maybe we had a fourth main point about how it survived the Industrial Revolution. And then our fifth main point was about how it's still popular today. Maybe that's what our speech would look like, and this would be a conclusion. But if I've got a really long speech, or at least a longer speech than what we do in here, then maybe I've talked about all these things, and now I'm shifting gears into another aspect of Chinese culture, and I'm done talking about palm reading altogether. Right? So, for a longer speech, if this is in the body, it's an internal summary. For our purposes, this would be enough to recap what the entire speech has been about because our speeches are so short. And then that would be in the conclusion. Signposts. If you think about this like holding up a sign to get attention, or you got a road sign on a post to grab attention, or you've got those ladies who walk in the ring of a boxing match and they're holding the sign that says the number of the round that you're about to go into. They're meant to draw attention, to say this is where we are in the boxing match, this is where we are in this speech. So a signpost is a brief statement inside the speech that shows where the speaker is or focuses attention on key ideas. For instance, the first, just by saying the first, you know I'm in the beginning. The second, you know I'm in the middle. The final, you know I'm at the end. People like to have their bearings and know where we are, and so those signposts can be subtle like this: the first, the second, the final, the beginning, the middle, the end. Even if you're watching a really good movie or you're on a really good date, you might still check the time just because you like to have your bearings. That's just human nature. So, the first cause of this problem is the inefficient agricultural production. The second cause is recurrent drought in the affected countries. The final cause is mismanagement of available food resources by local leaders. So, this would be causal order. And these are signposts that tell us where we are in that cause and effect pattern. We're at the beginning, the middle, the end. And that, my friends, is chapter 9. So I'm going to go ahead and post this for you. You might want to look back over this, especially as we begin crafting our preparation outlines, especially for the persuasive speech. So don't leave this alone. You might go back and review it, which is the case for a lot of the videos. Okay, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Thanks. Your topic outlines are due tonight at 11:55.